Good evening. It's October 22nd, 2023. Could people be seeing unidentified flying floral objects? Royal Botanical Gardens Kew found that most newly discovered plant species are endangered, while most fungi are not yet discovered. Scientists found Whistler waves near Venus that weren't caused by lightning. Sarah Skoll says it's not worth it to live in space. And the Pentagon has released a new UAP report for 2023. Was it written in a secret underground base by clones of Richard Doty? All this and more tonight. I'm your host, Telesma Blue Orb, and this is the first episode of the UFO Detox Hour. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Please welcome our fairy god hosts, Jeff Knox and Luis Cayetano.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi.
Would you like to say a few words?
I'm Jeff Knox. I'm a UFO historian and researcher, and I'm really interested in archiving the topic. And I'll be sharing today with you UFO stories from history.
Sweet.
I'm Luis Cayetano. I've got a background in evolutionary biology, and I'm interested in UFOs, the social aspect, and the extremist aspect. And I'll be talking about space habitability and the prospects of humanity living in space in the future.
Awesome. All right. And now for some news in brief. The ODNI published their UAP report for 2023. On Wednesday, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in the Pentagon released its newest report on what are categorized as unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP. This report covers the fiscal year of 2022 to 2023. The report covers 291 sightings collected by AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, charged with investigating anomalous phenomena for military purposes. AARO was established as a response to the Office of Naval Intelligence UAP Task Force in June 2022. 274 of the new 291 most recent reports AARO collected are from this fiscal year. The focus of the reports is around military installations. Of the total 801 reports received as of April, nearly all have been reports of aerial phenomena, but one is described as a maritime report. No health or physiological impacts have been reported. In a small number of cases, UAP were reported to have strange features such as high velocity and quote-unquote unknown morphologies. But Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, told CNN that the office has found ordinary explanations for about half of the cases. The remainder of only 2 to 4% remain anomalous and are to be investigated further. Kirkpatrick also said that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial phenomena, but that there is evidence that many UAP actually represent the military technology of foreign adversaries. The Royal Botanical Gardens Kew found most new plant species are endangered, and over 90% of fungi remain unidentified. Earlier this month, the Royal Botanical Gardens Kew in London, England, released their 5th edition of the State of the World's Plants and Fungi. 200 scientists in 30 countries around the world participated in the various studies that are included in the new richly illustrated 90-page report. The project was led by Alexandre Antonelli, Director of Science at RGBQ. It includes a new list of known vascular plant species called the World Checklist of Vascular Plants, created by Raphael Gzveretz. This list can be accessed through a searchable portal online. It includes over 350,000 accepted species. there are many more species that have not yet been properly classified, while around 2,500 new plant species are discovered each year. The report also says that while 15% of flora remain to be discovered, researchers predict that as much as 77% of undescribed species are threatened with extinction. The report also discusses fungi, stating that between 92 and 95% of fungus species remain to be described, while only a fraction of a percent of fungus species have been assessed for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List of Threatened Species. While most fungus species remain yet to be discovered, they are also the most diverse kingdom of life after animals, with some 2.5 million species. The study also identified regions of the world where the largest number of undiscovered plant species reside. Ahead of the publication, Alexandre Antonelli was interviewed by Shoni Bhattacharya at The Guardian. Antonelli said, quote, One thing that is very novel here is that we're not only talking about what we know, but what we don't know, which can be equally fascinating. So, what proportion of species we have no idea exist, but we can actually predict where they are, unquote. Given the high number of both plant and fungus flora yet to be described, it stands to reason that a number of these flora also produce unidentified aerial objects like spores, pollen, aerodynamic seeds, fluff, leaves, petals, detritus, sea foam, or perhaps other even more exotic forms. Excuse me, I forgot to close my window. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it open, though, for this one. Samin Vazir is the new chief editor of the journal Psychological Science. In recent years, the field of psychology has come under increased scrutiny because of the manipulation, data fraud, and incentives to publish certain types of psychological research. This has resulted in a replication crisis. Not only are researchers unable to replicate many psychological studies, which means that these studies are not reliable, but the same studies that can't be replicated are also cited more frequently than studies that can. Samin Vazir is a research psychologist and professor of psychology ethics and well-being at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Vazir's research focuses on research methods in psychology and structural systems in science. In addition, she founded the Society for Improvement of Psychological Science in order to help make science more transparent and rigorous. Vazir is a leader in the movement to reform psychology. In early October, the Association for Psychological Research announced that Vazir will become the new editor-in-chief of the journal Psychological Science. She will begin a 4-year tenure at the journal in January of next year. A major part of Vazir's work will be to improve the scientific quality of the publication. Vazir said in an interview, quote, We're planning to require that any published article at Psychological Science has open data, materials, and code, with exceptions in cases where that's ethically challenging, unquote. Vazir also hopes to make various other changes, such as making the peer review process at the journal more transparent by publishing an anonymous peer review history with each paper, underlining that authors may publish editors' decision letters in order to improve the journal's accountability, and improving the quality of how science gets reported. A wide range of topics associated with UFOs, from abduction experiences to eyewitnesses and testimony, will likely be greatly impacted by long-term improvements in the field of psychology. And now,
Hello, my name is Jeff Knox, and this is This Week in UFO History. Each week, I will highlight a couple cases that took place over this week in UFO history. This week, we have two classic cases, and a famous abduction from the late 50s, one of the early abduction stories, pre-Betty and Barney Hill by a few years. I'm, of course, talking about the Antonio Villalobos case, which, according to Isaac Coy, is the seventh most referenced case in the UFO literature. Following that, I have a case that has been called one of the best UFO cases by many people over the years, a title that's been given to many cases by many different people. So I will leave it up to you to decide what you think about it. And that is the Coin helicopter encounter that took place during the famous October 1973 wave. I'd like to apologize in advance if I butcher the pronunciation of some of these people or place names. I'm likely to do that. Let's get started with the first modern story of alien abduction, the Antonio Villalobos case of 1957. While this case's main event didn't start until the night of the 15th and the morning of the 16th, this was not the start of Boas's UFO sightings, which began 10 days earlier. Let's start with some background from his very own testimony. Quote, "It all began on the night of October 5th, 1957. There had been a party at my house, and we had gone to bed a little later than usual, at 11 o'clock. I was in my room with my brother João Villalobos. Because of the heat, I decided to open the window, which looks out upon the corral. Right in the middle of it, I then saw a silvery fluorescent reflection, brighter than moonlight, casting light all around it. It was very white, and I don't know where it came from. It was as if it came from on high, like the headlight of a car shining downward. Spreading its light around, but nothing was to be seen in the sky. From where the light seemed to be coming, I decided to call my brother and showed it to him. But he is a very incredulous sort of person, so he did not look and advised me to go to sleep. I closed the window shutters and we both lay down to sleep. A little while later, spurred on by curiosity, I opened the shutters once more. The light was still there, where it had been before. I kept on watching until all of a sudden it slowly began to move toward my window. I closed the shutters very quickly then. So quickly the noise woke my brother, who had already gone to sleep. Together we watched the light appear through the crevices of our shutters and shine through the tiles of the roof, lighting up the darkness of our room. It finally disappeared for good that night. The second episode occurred a little later on October 14th. It must have been between 9:30 and 10 p.m., but I cannot guarantee the hour, for I had no watch with me. I was in a field, plowing it with a tractor when it happened, and my other brother was with me too. We suddenly saw a very bright light, so bright that it hurt our eyes at the northern end of the field. When we saw it, it had been there already, and it was big too, about the size of a cartwheel. It seemed to be standing at about 100 meters from the ground, its light red light shining over a large surface. But it could have not been seen, so I cannot declare its existence. I'm sorry. There must have been some kind of object hidden by the light, but it could not be seen, so I cannot declare its existence. For the light itself was much too bright for me to be able to make anything out. I called my brother to come to find out what it was, but he did not want to, so I had to go alone. When I began to approach it, it moved suddenly with enormous speed. I went after it, and it went to the southern end of the field where it stopped again. I went after it again, and the same maneuver was repeated. By the time I felt tired, the same maneuver was then repeated no less than 20 times. By that time, I felt tired and gave up upon going after it, so I went back to my brother. The light kept still for a few minutes longer in the distance. Now and again, it seemed to throw forth rays in all directions, the same as the setting sun, sparkling. Then it suddenly disappeared as if it had been turned off. I'm not quite sure this is what actually happened, for I cannot remember if I kept looking in the same direction all the time. Maybe for a few seconds I glanced elsewhere, so it may have lifted up and disappeared before I had time to look back again. With that background in mind, the next night we get to the main event. On October 16th, 1957, on a farm near the town of São Francisco de Sales, Minas Gerais, Brazil, at 1 a.m., Antonio Villalobos is alone on a tractor plowing the fields when a red egg-shaped object appears above him. His tractor motor and lights fail. It lands nearby, and something grabs him as he tries to run away. 3 small figures bring him into the object. Once inside, he was stripped naked and covered with a strange liquid or gel. He is then subjected to tests before being left alone in a room with a kind of bed. This room fills with a noxious gray smoke that causes him to vomit. A little while later, a door opens and a short, naked woman appears. Boas is then made to have sex twice with this odd-looking woman. Afterwards, she points to her belly and then points towards the sky. Boas is then given a tour of the craft and is taken outside again around 5:30 a.m. That's the basically brief details of the Boas case. Our second case today is the Coyne helicopter case. On October 18, 1973, near Mansfield, Ohio, at 11 p.m., Army Reserve Captain Lawrence J. Coyne, with his crew, First Lieutenant Arrigo Jesse, Sergeant John Healy, and Specialist Robert Janasek, is flying an Army Reserve UH-1 Huey helicopter at 1,200 feet from Columbus to Cleveland, Ohio. Healy notices a steady southbound red light. It looks like the port wing light of an aircraft, but seems brighter and carries none of the usual FAA-required lights. He watches it disappear behind the helicopter and does not tell the others. A couple minutes later, Janasek sees a bright red light on the eastern horizon and watches it for 90 seconds, realizing it is pacing the helicopter. He mentions it to Coyne, who tells Healy to watch it. Soon the light turns and comes towards the helicopter. Coyne takes the controls from Jesse and puts the helicopter into a descent. He calls Mansfield, Ohio approach control, but fails to get a response. The red light is now closing on them at a dangerous rate of speed, possibly 684 miles per hour. Coyne pushes the stick down, forcing the helicopter to descend quickly when it gets to an altitude of 650 feet above the treetops. Coyne looks up and sees the object covering the entire front windshield. The red light is on the nose and a white light is on the tail of the cigar-shaped metallic structure. Under the tail, a green beam sweeps a 90-degree arc and shines through the windshield. It hovers above them for about 10 to 12 seconds before accelerating and heading northwest. The bright white light just snaps out. Coyne looks at the altimeter and realizes they have been ascending and are now at 3,500 feet, but the stick is still down. He pulls the stick up and the helicopter levels out at about 3,800 feet. Reviewing his instruments, Coyne notices the magnetic compass is rotating slowly, while the radiomagnetic indicator is functioning normally. They make radio contact with Akron and fly to Cleveland without any further incident. Other witnesses on the ground have also seen the incident. Now, both of these cases are covered in pretty extensive detail in the UFO literature. These are just brief narrative summaries of the main events, and they lack many specific details or analysis of the case. If you'd like to really dig into these cases and learn about all those nitty-gritty details, along with various perspectives on these cases, be sure to check out my in-depth case threads that I post on Twitter, where I provide as many sources as I can for you guys to check out on these cases and do your own investigation. And that's what I have for you this week.
You're muted.
Sorry. This is a brief panel segment to respond for people to respond to the story that we just heard, the stories that we just heard. If anyone would like to contribute something to say, I know Jeff has something to say, or I believe he does. Go ahead, Jeff.
Do I? Yeah. So, these cases are very interesting. The two classic cases that there's been a lot of famous ufologists that have, said the Coyne case is just one of the best cases out there. Certainly one of the key cases of the October 1973 wave, which you also have like the Pascagoula event, for example. But there are, skeptical arguments on the case as well. If you check out my threads, there's a site called Parabunk that argues essentially that it was just distant lights on like a refueling tanker that was in the area flying around that they saw, and that maybe various prop wash could have caused the helicopter's weird altitude effects from this close flying plane. And if you actually look at some of the original testimony, that actually, it does fit. Even Kevin Randall agrees that. The Via Boas case, though, is really interesting because a lot of people considered the Hill case, kind of the first big American case that was an abduction that kind of kicked things off. But the Villa Boas case is largely considered the first kind of modern abduction story. Of course, you could go back to airships and whatnot.
Tangent to that, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, tangentially to that, also on Expanding Frontiers Research, Jack Brewer just posted an article a couple of days ago, having to do with the well, not with the Hill case, but it was a letter from Betty Hill that to Anne Druffel in the 90s, and she like is talking about an unnamed abduction investigator just you know, and describing this abduction investigation in a very straightforward way of being like, yeah, and you know, like he tried to, you know, hypnotize this person and was trying to, you know, like elicit it. I mean, she didn't say it in those words, but basically Betty Hill was kind of giving an abduction narrative that was very critical, and it was a rather unusual perspective on Betty Hill, I think. What do you think about that, Jeff?
Yeah, it's a weird perspective to take, considering her further later crazy, you know, incidents and sightings and events and stuff that she claimed to experience. She seems awful willing to accept what happened to her as absolute fact, reality, but pretty dismissive of other people. But that being said, she's not exactly wrong in the letter either. Like, that abduction researcher, whoever it may be, was basically trying to like convince a lady she was abducted when she's never even seen a UFO. And she's also not wrong about ufologists, how it's not the government, you know, secreting away information and like censoring it. It's UFO researchers that hoard stuff and squirrel it away and won't share it with other researchers. Like, so she had a lot of actually really good points that just kind of, given what we know about Betty Hill, seem kind of contradictory, considering her other statements and whatnot.
Luis, Luis, do you have any responses to any of these stories?
I'd be interested to know what the social context was in Brazil at the time, and what sort of media they were consuming. Because we know about a fair bit about, you know, the lead up to the Hill case. That episode of what was it, the Bolero Shield of the Twilight Zone?
Yeah,
stuff like that. UFO books that Betty had consumed, and but like, what about Villas Boas? Maybe he had also consumed something like that. Maybe contact
in Brazil, like it has a huge, and South American cultures. There's a huge interest in UFOs and aliens and stuff. There's a very strong like culture of that kind of folklore in South America, just like here in the States. It's different, but it's very like strong and saturated, I think. But another thing too, like, is that I think when we're talking about like how culture impacts people's experience reports and their memories of their experiences, I think that you know, there's so much evidence, you know, that there's like a clear, like some sort of clear like causal relationship, but there's no specific causal relationships, you know, like the Bolero whatever, the episode of the Outer Limits that you're talking about, like you know, it could be that Barney Hill saw that episode and then he unconsciously like processed that imagery, but there's no way to prove it. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, yeah, but clearly though, Betty and Barney Hill would have been exposed to that kind of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so people obviously have discussed whether or not Betty and Barney Hill could have been influenced by the Villa Boas story. And some people have argued that, well, this story was printed first at this time, they could have seen it, but that actually was a reprint of the book, and it wasn't actually in the original print of the book. And so, while they may not have been influenced by the Villa Boas story, there's certainly a lot of precedence for like the imagery and what they describe, and everything from science fiction to even stories in a Donald Kehoe book. But as far as the specifically what Luis was, I think, asking, as what could have influenced Antonio Villas-Boas, it's been argued he could have heard about the Elizabeth Clare contactee story in South Africa. There was also a story in I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Brazilian magazine. It's like something Cruz something. I don't even know what it's called. But there was a story before Antonio Villas-Boas that sounded awfully similar to kind of his story and contained elements. And one of the things that really kind of, I think, vaulted the Antonio Villas-Boas story into becoming such a big story is that people really sold up this idea that he was basically just this primitive, uneducated farmer, a country bumpkin that could not have imagined a story like this with his, uneducatedness. But that's actually simply not true. He was from a very wealthy family. He has a law degree now. So he was actually quite educated and from a wealthy family. He wasn't this dumb country bumpkin that couldn't possibly have read material that would have influenced him to come up with a story. And I think had people known his real background, it might not have got as much traction, but there definitely was quite a few places, either from science fiction that Brazilians were interested in to the paranormal that they were, interested in. I mean, this case was, there's already, big UFO organizations like in Brazil, like the famous Brazilian ufologist, like Dr. Lavo Frontes, was the guy who, those quotes that I read from Villas-Boas came from the interview he did with Villas-Boas.
All right, I'm going to interrupt you there, Jeff. We're going to move along to the next segment. Sorry, my apologies.
Go ahead.
The Parker Solar Probe detected Whistler waves around Venus that were not caused by lightning. We know of a variety of strange phenomena that happen on Earth, some more mysterious than others. But what kinds of plasma phenomena occur on other planets? Venus is the second planet from the Sun and Earth's closest neighbor. Earth and Venus also share a similar size and mass, but whereas Earth harbors complex life, Venus has a hot and thick atmosphere full of carbon dioxide. A recent study published in Geophysical Letters used data from NASA's solar probe to try to help answer a hotly debated question. Is there lightning on the planet Venus? And how often does it happen? Previous data shows that Venus has discharges of something called Whistler waves. These are very low frequency plasma waves that travel along electromagnetic field lines. On Earth, electromagnetic field lines are produced by the planet's own powerful electromagnetic field. And Whistler waves are produced by lightning strikes on Earth. When this happens, they shoot rapidly out into space, several times the height of Earth's radius. But the planet Venus is different because its magnetic field is not produced by large amounts of iron and nickel inside the planet the way that Earth's is. Instead, the field is produced by Venus's atmosphere as it interacts with plasma that is constantly ejected at high speeds from the sun. The atmosphere of Venus has an electromagnetic field all its own. The new study looks at data from the Parker Solar Probe's Fields suite of instruments that detect and measure electric and magnetic fields. The probe is on a mission to study the sun. As it passes by Venus in its orbit, it uses Venus's gravity to propel itself closer and closer to the sun. The team, led by Harriet George at the University of Colorado Boulder, looked at data that the probe gathered in its closest approach about 1,500 miles from Venus in February 2021. The probe passed through the sheath and magnetotail of Venus's electromagnetic field. Just like on Earth, Venus's electromagnetic field is thrust away from the sun by the solar wind, forming a long tail. This is where the probe gathered its data. The probe was able to measure Whistler waves there, which were found at 0.39 times the radius of Venus from its surface on the night side. These Whistler waves were moving towards Venus, though, which means they couldn't be generated by lightning. Lightning would move away from the planet. They also found that there were Langmuir waves, rapid oscillations of particles inside a plasma, not Louis and Cayetano, but Langmuir waves. These rapid oscillations of particles in plasma that occurred at the same time and for the same duration as the Whistler waves. Excuse me. While the Whistler waves were visible at about 50 to 300 hertz, the Langmuir waves were visible at 15 to 50 kilohertz. As was found in previous studies, there were also no signals created by lightning in the broadband electric spectrum. The team suggests that the presence of Langmuir waves may provide an alternative explanation for what is happening, since lightning is ruled out. They suggest instead that both the Whistlers and Langmuir waves are produced by the reconnection of magnetic field lines. As plasma ejected from the sun stretches a planet's magnetic field out into space, these field lines can snap, pinch, or reconfigure. They can then come back together again. Reconnection is thought to happen in Venus's electromagnetic field too, as another team, Zhang et al., found a plasmoid in the magnetotail in a study published in 2012. This plasmoid, basically a self-contained area of plasma with its own electromagnetic field and field lines, formed inside of Venus's magnetotail as magnetic field lines reconfigured. The new study from the team at UC Boulder concludes that lightning likely occurs much less often on Venus than people previously thought. But what sorts of other weird phenomena can be found in the skies and deep space surrounding Venus, as well as all the other planets? And what does this tell us about weird plasma phenomena right here on Earth? So, what do you guys think? Whistler waves on Venus, weird atmospheric plasma phenomena. What are your opinions? Any opinions?
Plasma's cool.
Yep. I'd like to, plasma is also found on Jupiter. What are the, I'd like to know, like, what are the, how is it translatable to Earth science? So maybe like there are phenomena which are unique to these planets and they don't occur on Earth, or there are some others which are, they've got analogs on Earth. So yeah, I think space science could be used to better understand the Earth as well, potentially.
Mm. Yeah, I agree for sure.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say I still need to do some more research into that whole magnetic wormhole thing, because it kind of reminds me of similarities with that, with where they like a magnetic wormhole. It's like a real wormhole per se, but it's transferring like a magnetic field or charge from one point of space to another point of space that they've recreated in the labs here on Earth.
Right.
So I'm going to have to dig more into your story there and into that, because I'm reminded of the two things and need to figure out how they relate. But yes, it would be nice to have Campbell, because he's the plasma guy.
I would like to have Campbell on the show sometime. That would be great. Yeah. Or, whatever. We can figure stuff like that out.
Maybe we can get Phil Class's ghost on here to talk about plasma and UFOs. Phil Class.
That would be great. Yeah, to talk about ball lightning and how mundane it is. It's just such a normal, mundane phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is
the show is a work in progress, folks, and I am totally fine with that. I'm not going to be a perfectionist. I would rather just be really relaxed and take my time. And but we want y'all to be involved. The people that are watching the show, whether or not you're watching it live, it doesn't really matter. If you want to be involved, you can give us constructive feedback. Operative word there is constructive. But I mean, also, like, if you want to get involved in other ways, like if you want to help out, or something like that, if you want to be on the show, please feel free to contact me at swampformsandphantoms@gmail.com, or just leave a comment under the video. And I'm sorry if I'm missing your comments. But anyway, moving right along. Up next, we have Luis Cayetano with a segment on, well, I'll let you take it away, Luis.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be about the latest Scientific American issue, which is out now. It's the October 2023. It should still be available on your local magazine shelves. So it's got a couple of stories I want to talk about. And next week, I'll talk about another one in this very issue. But today, I'll just talk about two. The first one is written by Philip Plait, and it's called The Habitable Zone Problem. So Philip Plait is an astronomer and popular science writer, and I recommend that you check out his stuff. But this is a very good article. It talks about the habitable zone concept, or the Goldilocks zone idea. Now, just giving you a brief overview of this article. You guys can hear me, right? Okay, good. I'm not muted. So currently there are about 5,500 extrasolar planets that have been detected. These are just planets which exist outside of our solar system. And there are about 7,000 other candidate worlds or objects or detections which could indicate other planets out there. Now, we want to know whether we're alone in the cosmos. That's been an age-old question that humans have asked for millennia. Could any of these other worlds harbor some form of life? And what parameters could we use to make educated guesses about their chances of doing that? Technology is improving. The way is open now for more types of biosignatures to be detected. One concept that's been considered for decades as a useful sort of first step to determining whether other planets are in the Milky Way may harbor life is the habitable zone idea. So this talks about the distance from a local star at which liquid water can subsist on the surface of that planet. The Earth is largely covered in water and is teeming with life. So the hope, if not the expectation, is that planets with similar conditions via liquid water will also harbor life. So liquid water is really the thing that we're looking for. We're looking for life as we know it. So this article by Phil Plait deals with some limitations in the habitable zone idea and why we should refine it and also reconsider some of its assumptions. For one thing, you still need water on the planet, and being in the so-called Goldilocks zone doesn't mean that there will be water. Okay, so planets themselves may also influence their prospects of liquid water. Darker planets absorb more light and will heat up. Lighter colored planets will be colder. The greenhouse gas concentrations in a planet's atmosphere will also have an effect. The more greenhouse gases there are, the further it has to be from the parent star to not become like Venus, which we just saw a moment ago. Venus is extremely hot, very, very high pressure atmosphere. Notably, Venus may well once have had conditions conducive to life as we know it, but it's now a searing inferno hellscape. Probably there's no life there. This all underlines the distinction between habitable and inhabited. Being in a zone conducive to life is no guarantee that life will actually exist there. There's even some uncertainty about where the zone extends in our own solar system. So it's kind of a complex equation with many different parameters. and we're not quite sure exactly where the zone resides. An even more fascinating issue is that liquid water may exist beyond the habitable zone. In the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn, planetary probes such as Voyager 2 and Cassini have transmitted data about these ice moons, such as Europa and Enceladus, and these moons appear to have liquid subsurface oceans. So deep under the thick ice layer, there's thought to be liquid water. The liquid state of these oceans is maintained by geothermal activity resulting from the tidal forces of the parent planets. It's sort of like when you squeeze one of those stress balls. The closer the planet comes to the moon comes to the planet, it's going to be squeezed harder, and then it is, when it moves away, it's going to be squeezed not so hard. So this cycle is causing geothermal activity and heat, and that's how you get the liquid water. So no star is necessary for liquid water to persist on these moons because there's not enough solar radiation to heat the ice enough to cause it to liquefy. Even more mind-boggling is the possibility that there could be planets out there ejected from their native solar system, flung out into deep space, into interstellar space. These so-called rogue planets may have moons orbiting around them. And again, if they're imposing enough tidal force on these moons, that could also be conducive to liquid water and therefore maybe to life. Something else to think about is that water may not be the only solvent in which life could evolve. For example, Saturn's moon of Titan has got a vast amounts of methane in liquid form. So these vast methane lakes are made of hydrocarbon molecules, and molecules in Titan's upper atmosphere may also be engaging in complexification due to the effects of solar radiation. So these molecules are sort of cycled back and forth, up and down the atmosphere. They could precipitate back down onto these methane lakes, and then you could have some sort of complexification going on. Potentially, life may exist on Titan, but it would probably be very different to what we see on Earth. Some researchers suggest that the habitable zone label be replaced with temperate zone. It's still a useful idea, though, because it's sensible to look for the type of life that we are, because that's what we have experience and proof of. But we do need to expand the concept from its traditional form because it's too crude to capture all the subtlety that we now know of. The second article I wanted to talk about is Sarah Skold's article in the same issue. Will humans ever live in space? I don't know if you wanted to. Yeah, there's a picture of Biosphere 2, which is in Arizona. This was kind of ended in a fiasco, but a very interesting idea. It did have some relevance to space science and human long-term persistence in space. So they had these different chambers or greenhouse sections where you've got like a rainforest, and then you've got a desert, and then you've got a barrier reef and stuff like that. They're trying to understand more about Earth system science, but also how humans could live in enclosed habitats. If we were to go to Mars, we might need something like this. Anyway, this is called Earth 2. And, but anyway, I'll get to that in a second. Now, humans evolved in the conditions on Earth. How successful would we be in our quest to live in space? According to Sarah Skold, probably not very successful. Cancer risks, muscle atrophy, bone density loss. These are just some of the problems that face long-term visitors in space. There are also ethical questions that we haven't really come to terms with. The problems were not resolved at this year's Analog Astronaut Conference, which took place at the famous Biosphere 2 facility in Arizona. Despite the daunting challenges, the conclusion was the usual one, that humans are fated to live in space. But is this actually true? The story of Biosphere 2 was marred by biophysical oversights that led to insufficient oxygen, water, and food, and severe social and psychological problems. The latter are arguably even more daunting than the physical challenges. Projects like Biosphere 2 that are being run today involve people designated as analog astronauts. So these people do not go into space, but they stay on special habitations on Earth to study how humans would respond to long periods of isolation and living with, you know, just a couple of other people doing certain tasks that need to be done in space or on other planets, and getting data and ideas that way. So there are facilities and participants around the world, and more are planned. The analog astronauts include people from a wide range of fields and walks of life. The human body is ill-suited to space, however. We evolved on a planet with a thick atmosphere and strong gravity. Spaceflight wreaks havoc on our bodies at all levels of biological organization: DNA, the microbiome, the circadian rhythm, vision, cancer risk, muscle and bone density, the immune system, the heart, fluid movement in the head, and other aspects. These are all affected by being in space, usually for the worse. And we understand this from astronauts from around the world who have spent prolonged periods in space and then studying their physiological responses. Blood vessels in the brain get stiffer under conditions of microgravity. There might be ways of countering this with knowledge about genetic pathways. But in fact, sometimes when we try to fix things, we might actually be making things worse because, for example, that stiffening of those vessels might actually be a mechanism that is protective. And if we mess with that, that could have worse effects down the road for that astronaut. So this also generalizes to other physiological changes. We have to be very, very careful about engineering humans and assuming that genetic engineering would be a fix for anything that we encounter. Astronauts do hours of exercise every day in space to slow down the atrophy of their muscles and bones, but even this is not enough. So might this be a permanent problem in space? And also low gravity worlds like the Moon and Mars. Radiation is perhaps the biggest threat to bodies in space. Cosmic rays and particles spewed from the sun can damage DNA and cause cancer. The unpredictability of the sun acting up is a major concern, making it difficult to ensure that astronauts will always find timely shelter during a solar storm if they were, say, exploring the lunar surface. Galactic cosmic rays are even more dangerous and would not be blocked by things like water shields, which are one proposed mechanism for protecting astronauts. The answer could lie in helping the body repair damage and using special compounds to help repair DNA. Even if all these physical problems can be fixed, or at least substantially reduced, psychological issues remain. So let me just read verbatim the list of items mentioned in the article: poor emotional regulation, reduced resilience, increased anxiety and depression, communication problems within the team, sleep disturbances, and decreased cognitive and motor functioning brought on by stress. So imagine if these problems are in a confined space with a few people, and you can imagine the results. Then there's the economic cost. The question is always, who's going to pay for this? Private companies would be unlikely to front the entire cost and would be concerned with making a profit. In other words, what's the business case to be made for long-term human presence in space and human habitations? Commercial enterprises like SpaceX are still largely dependent on government contracts. The demand from broader society is still not strong enough for routine space travel to make capitalist sense. Something being technically feasible doesn't mean that it's commercially feasible. There's, of course, a niche market for space tourism these days among some of the super wealthy, but this undertaking does not come with the same protections covering government astronauts. An accident could throw a wrench into space tourism for a very long time. Also consider that only a small proportion of people who could afford to go into space would want to live on Mars rather than just take a short vacation or viewing it from orbit. So this undercuts the case for permanent space outposts, which would themselves be very, very expensive. People have often likened space expansion to the explorations of pioneers on Earth, people who went out and discovered new lands, but this isn't necessarily so. Those explorers were seeking resources like gold and land. There's nothing inevitable about long-term space travel and colonization if we can't be sure of the value equation on the other side. Taxpayers, too, have historically been quite reluctant to pay for manned space exploration. National polls have found that relatively few people place it as a high priority. Even during the Apollo missions, the American public did not think the majority of these missions were all that important. While it's true that space travel has got spin-off benefits for people on Earth, it also seems to be the case that direct investment in technologies for Earth-based applications is more cost-effective and efficient. Then there are the ethical issues. Of course, space travel can be inspiring and bring people together in a quest to demonstrate that we can achieve anything we want. But is that enough? What if it's diverting resources and effort from the many other problems and things that we want to be focusing on? An even more basic question is whether we should send people on long-term journeys. We've talked about the risks of cancer and so on, and there's the not insignificant risk that astronauts will die on their missions, and even surviving on Mars, for example, might end up being its own type of hell. Is there an ethical obligation for astronauts to be able to enjoy their destination? Microscopic organisms could also contaminate the worlds that we visit, and conversely, harmful ET microbes could be returned to Earth. Do explorers have an ethical responsibility to leave places as they found them? And there's also the implicit assumption that explorers represent the best in humanity. Some question this and would argue that there's no correlation between travel and virtue. Many people have made massive contributions to humanity without being explorers. There might also be a risk of space travel being actually contributing to stagnation on Earth, whereas ensuring the stable continuation of life on Earth is what will lead to progress. The constraints and challenges of space travel and living in space, with its Spartan living quarters and extreme focus on particular tasks that could mean the difference between life and death, may be so great that people literally forget how to live back on Earth when they return. There's evidence from this from some of the analog astronauts who were unable to do basic social things and to multitask when they were released from their space analog environment. Despite all these challenges, the analog astronauts and many others still fill the pool of space. And that's all I had for you guys. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Luis. Sorry about that. I think I really agree with Scholl's position, basically, that this whole idea of the space age it's a product of the Cold War and this mythology of American exceptionalism, and this kind of idea that we need to push the species forward in this very outdated futurist way, on the basis of all of these technologies that were developed over the past 300 years, and particularly over the past 100 years, that really are terrible for the environment, terrible for people, and all of these things. I really think that STEM is important, but I think that we need to get away from the STEM that promotes the destruction of the environment, and that doesn't prioritize the good of humanity very first. I think at this point it's not ethically the right thing to do to continue trying to promote these outdated hauntological basically visions of the future that have no meaning. That's my opinion. What do you think, Jeff?
So you don't believe in fully automated luxury communism brought about by asteroid mining?
Well, I don't know.
There's also implications here for UFOs, because maybe intelligent life is not destined to go out into space. And many people assume that there's a trajectory from, as I mentioned, exploration of the continents, and then obviously the next step would be space. but like that's not necessarily true, and maybe life rarely leaves its planet. So
This
that could
is
be
actually
a solution to the Fermi paradox. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually like a discussion or argument we've been having on the INS like Discord recently about whether or not this idea that people think life must exist in the universe so that it can be coming here, and do we really know life must exist in the universe? But even then, like you said, just because it exists, just because it develops in another place, doesn't mean it's going to build a spaceship and come here. Like there could be tons of life in the universe that never leaves its planet. It's a big leap, and there's many steps between life developing, let alone intelligent life, and that they would have the desires, motivations, interests, and every technology to be able to leave their planet to even come here. And a lot of people don't take that into consideration. They just think, well, if life can exist, then that means there could be aliens coming to see us in UFOs right now.
Well, I think too
maybe
that
they are, but maybe they're not.
People have this kind of like this idea that like we have to go out and explore the universe, and we have to do it right now. Oh man, it's going to take thousands of years. Like, why can't we just do that now? And the thing is that we already like have, spaceship Earth, right? And that like Earth has existed for billions of years, and during that time has been orbiting around the sun, which has been orbiting around Sagittarius A star, like traveling all the way through the galaxy. And so, the way I think about it is like, well, through all of this deep space time, right? Like, is what is the space age really that important? Like, I mean, isn't the Earth like way more important? Like, I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling. Anyway, let's move on to the next segment. We are like already at an hour, by the way, so we're just gonna keep going. And I'm sorry for folks who are expecting only an hour-long show. I think this show is probably not going to be only an hour long most of the time. It's probably going to be a lot longer than that.
Can I just say something for 10 seconds real quick?
Absolutely, Jeff. Go ahead.
This is actually how this SETI and life in the universe stuff actually gets brought into UFOs by, and those people do address UFOs. Like if you look in the various volumes, like, and I posted the names of these books like in the chat. Like this has a chapter by Robert Schaefer on that addresses UFOs and if it's alien life visiting us. There's lots of great books on life in the universe, and they basically all bring up UFOs. Stephen J. Dick, who's basically one of the main kind of like astrobiology kind of like guys that have written about this topic. He's got dozens of books on the extraterrestrial life debate going back, like what people thought hundreds of years ago. This has got a chapter on UFOs. He recently talked at a UFO event. Like all these guys studying life in the universe and whether it can come here do bring up UFOs and do discuss whether those could possibly be, alien life. And they, of course, address the issues with that idea. But just check the chat. Sorry, that was more than 20 seconds.
No worries. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for providing your insight.
Periodic cicadas attract birds to eat them, so their young don't get eaten, leading to explosions of plant-eating bugs. In the spring of 2021, a vast population of large flying insects called cicadas began emerging from the ground en masse in many areas of the eastern United States, after hibernating in the earth for over 15 years. This population of cicadas is known as brood 10, because it is one of 15 populations of periodic cicadas that appear in the eastern United States only during particular periodic years. After crawling out of the ground as flightless nymphs, they shed their exoskeletons to take on their final adult form. They then create dense swarms that fill their local environments for 5 or 6 weeks, lay eggs inside of tree branches, and then die. Their offspring hatch inside the branches and fall down to the ground in the summer, where they burrow into the ground to hibernate. Brood 10 is a population of periodic cicadas, which means that instead of appearing once every year, they only appear periodically after hibernating for many years inside the ground. A team of researchers studied Brood 10 and its ecology to see how it would affect the flow of food and nutrients in the ecosystem. Their study was published in the Journal of Science on Friday with lead author Zoe Getman Pickering, and it examines local ecologies in the years around the Brood 10 emergence in 2021. Sorry if I said Brood X, I meant Brood 10 earlier. They collected 983 reports of birds feeding on cicadas by doing field work and also by collecting reports from bird watchers. The nearly 1,000 sightings of birds feeding on cicadas included 82 bird species. These ranged in size from blue-gray gnat catchers to trumpeter swans. The researchers also set up decoy caterpillars made of plasticine on the understories of white oak trees. They then periodically checked the decoys to see if birds pecked on them. The researchers did this in 2020, 2021, and 2022. In 2021, the year that Brood 10 emerged, birds tried to eat the decoy caterpillars much less often than in the year before or the year after. During these same 3 years, the researchers also looked at the rate at which caterpillars fed on the leaves of white oak trees. While birds apparently spent much less time hunting caterpillars in 2021, the researchers found that caterpillars seemed to spend much more time eating oak leaves. In 2021, they found that oak leaves were much more damaged from caterpillars than in the year before or the year after, Quote, "The leaves looked like lace. They had so many holes of different shapes and sizes," unquote, Getman Pickering was quoted as saying in an article at science.org. Furthermore, they looked at the caterpillars of the eclipsed oak dagger or raspberry bud dagger moth, Acronicta increta, a very common caterpillar in areas where the study took place. The caterpillars were far more common in 2021, and they were measurably larger than in other years. The study shows how a periodic cicada brood can cause many different bird populations to eat cicadas instead of caterpillars. This allows caterpillars to thrive without getting hunted as much and also to eat many more leaves from the trees that they live on. The authors state, quote, "Our study demonstrates that periodical cicada emergences can rewire forest food webs," unquote. They argue that this type of pulse rewiring promotes more complex food webs, and that it has diverse effects that can last for years after the cicada's brief arrival. Much like UFOs, cicadas and birds are also flying objects. But unlike UFOs, we also know for certain that they're intelligently controlled. One can expect cicadas and birds to share a lot in common with other types of flying objects, whether they are intelligently controlled or just propelled by external forces. One can expect that any physical object will be affected by its own environment, for example, how cicadas are hunted by birds. But one can also expect that any physical object will itself affect its environment. The cicadas influence how birds eat. Not only this, but we can also expect that there will be indirect effects as well. When birds hunt cicadas, they are not hunting caterpillars. Caterpillars thrive, and all of the oak leaves get eaten. To put it briefly, if there is a physical object that is flying, it must have flown from somewhere for some reason. And it will no doubt push objects aside, flash people in the eyes, or in some way or another cause things to change in its own physical environment. And not only that, but those changes will ultimately result in other changes. To use a popular expression, nothing ever happens in a vacuum. All right. So this is the second half of the show.
it might not be the second half of the show, but it's the second part of the show. So what did y'all think? What did you think of that story?
I wonder if you could compare these different dates where these upticks on those charts with UFO sightings in the areas where that stuff happens. See if birds might be the cause of some of these UFO sightings. I did do a thread in the past on how insects can be the cause of UFO sightings. In fact, it was studied in the Skinwalker Ranch area in the Uinta Basin. There's a couple of studies and articles about how insects could have been responsible for some of that kind of flap of sightings. So it's and I also just posted a picture of some that look like lights flying through the air, and it was spider webs wafting through the air. So there's definitely insects can be the cause of many of a UFO sighting. So
yeah, and I think this story and also the story that I did on the RGBQ or RBGQ, these I think both point to the fact that there are UFOs that go almost entirely overlooked all the time because people don't see them and they don't report them because they're just too small or too mundane, and but there's if there's if you go to my YouTube channel, The Earth, I have a playlist on my channel that's just devoted to bubbles, and one of the videos is a video of sea foam getting kicked up into a little vortex for a minute, sea foam, and that's made of plant matter and organic matter, maybe not necessarily all plant matter, but it's largely made up of like algae and like bits and pieces of organisms that are dead, excuse me. And so I think there are probably like unidentified flying objects, in the sense of parts of the the fungus kingdom and parts of the plant kingdom and species of insects doing weird stuff in the atmosphere. Those are all unidentified phenomena in the atmosphere, and so that I think is that is a part of the study. Like if you're going to seriously study like the science of UFOs and UAP, I mean not you specifically, Jeff, I'm just kidding. But yeah, if one wants to do that and have like a full comprehensive picture, then they would also look at these types of flying objects. What do you guys think? Do you agree with that, or do you think that's do you? Because I could be wrong. I could be making some sort of error. So
I think it also has a lesson in there about when people think that something's unexplained, then it has to be something otherworldly. But it could well be something which we just don't know about yet on our planet. There's plenty of precedents for that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There are all sorts of phenomena that were just discovered in the past 40 years. Different, weather phenomena and plasma phenomena, like the sprites and jets, of course, and the aurora named Steve, who's just. I like to imagine that it's just like one aurora and like never changes, and it's just like goes around and hangs out at parties or something. And ball lightning is still very mysterious. There's not a whole lot of physical evidence to support the existence of ball lightning, and Jeff and I were kind of debating Hestalin in our private Discord chat because Jeff is skeptical of Hestalin of the Hestalin phenomena, but and I'm not. I mean, I am skeptical of things around the Hestalin phenomena, but I think that there is some sort of actual physical phenomenon that exists there, that there's enough physical evidence to demonstrate that. Yes. So yeah, we are in the panel segment, which means that we're just talking with each other. So, does anyone have anything that they'd like to say?
Has anybody read the latest UAP report?
I just looked at the various charts and stuff and the numbers and the highlights, and it's pretty similar to previous ones. Just kind of reiterates again, like they have not seen any evidence of any extraterrestrial craft or any of that kind of stuff. So it's it's about the same percentages as we've kind of always got. I do question that what they call a sphere. They've got this huge, if you look at the chart, a huge amount is a sphere. I think a sphere is just going to be any sort of point light source, right? Like, I'm not sure they know that it's an actual sphere, three-dimensional sphere. It's just a point of light. So I'm not sure I'd classify that sphere, but
well, there's also there's reports of flying copies of the Michael Crichton paperback sphere too.
Yeah, and and I like Louise was saying, just because they mentioned there are a few cases that they get that are anomalous enough for them to further look into, but again, that does not mean it's ET. It doesn't mean it's non-human technology, and in many of the cases, by their own admission, they just don't have enough data. These cases are kind of like in this low information zone. They don't have all that excellent everybody loves to talk about, but the multi-sensor data, like these cases just don't seem to have that. So while they may be weird, they may not even be able to identify them. That does not necessarily mean there's anything truly weird about them, that there's anything extraterrestrial or non-human. So but it's very similar to the same stuff Blue Book and everyone else said. After that came out, I posted a clip from the Betty and Barney Hill movie, The UFO Incident, where the psychiatrist is talking to his Air Force buddy. And it's basically, says the same kind of thing. We get so many cases every year, 1,500 or something, I think he says, and 95% of them turn out to have prosaic explanations, but there's still that, residual, 5 or whatever percent it is that they can't explain. Maybe it's something, truly unknown, not from here. Maybe it's just they don't have the data.
Simon Fly in the chat asked, Jeff, what do you think about the Heston phenomena?
I thought he was asking about the report. As far as the phenomena, I mean, I think the phenomena, I don't doubt that people are seeing things, that they're recording things on video. I think a lot of the time it's probably just planes. Like maybe there is some meteorological thing going on there, like earth lights of some kind. I haven't seen the convincing data, but like I said, I haven't dug as deep into as others have. I've just, I've watched, some documentaries. I met Erling Strand at a conference, and I've watched various lectures on it, and I'm just not convinced. But that being said, even if there is something going on as far as lights there, I don't think that means that it's, extraterrestrial. I think if there is something novel going on there, it almost certainly will be something natural, a natural phenomenon that's being created, which is cool in and of itself from a science perspective. It's just not like a UFO thing.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that last point for sure. That I don't think that it's going to be, I don't think there's a lot of strong evidence there for really exotic and weird phenomena and stuff like that. I don't think there's like plasma proto-organisms or anything like that. I think because they do get these high strangeness reports there from Heston, but I mean, when you compare that to any other place, it's like, yeah, I mean, humanoids and craft and those sorts of things, they get reported all over the place. And so like if it's like, oh well, this place is a hotspot for like nocturnal lights, but you start gathering reports there, then of course you're going to end up finding high strangeness reports, because people report high strangeness stuff everywhere. Like it's almost there's an irony in it, because it's not actually that strange to see something that's strange.
Yeah, Greg Long has got his whole Ball of Lights project, tracking that stuff because, like you said, you got Yakima, you got things like Marfa and Min Min Lights, Brown Mountain, etc. But and the weird thing though with these kind of light phenomena like that is that a lot of times with a UFO sighting, it's when it's just something kind of slow moving and not doing anything remarkable. Oh, that's typically when you kind of dismiss it as, not being, like a true UFO, whatever that's supposed to mean, is not being, like truly interesting. But when it comes to a lot of these ball of light sightings that are just like in Yakima, for example, these slow, like kind of moving like lights that people see, like that actually is supposed to be an indicator that it is something unusual because it's not doing these fast movements and other stuff. So it's there may be two entirely different things, like natural phenomena in some places and
well, I think that I do think that there's Simon Fly. Well, when I'm talking about high strangeness, what I mean is like a specific class of reports. I'm using kind of Heinekian language here. I'm talking about close encounters and humanoids, abductions, weird cryptids, injured cold, men in black, that kind of stuff. The kind of stuff that you would might find in the pages of John Keel, but also, I think that high strangeness, a lot of these high strangeness reports do indicate actual experiences, like I think people actually do experience seeing humanoids and, little people and dwarves driving little bumper cars and stuff like that. And we don't really have a good understanding of what those experiences like are or where they come from or something. But that's what I mean by high strangeness, like specifically like, close range structured craft or, I guess I'm not sure. And also like effects, like physical effects. I can't remember the name, but but also like humanoids, and then abductions as well.
But that all that other stuff you mentioned, that's people have actually looked into that a lot, and they've considered things like, well, they've actually found evidence that it's actually hypnopompic hallucinations and false memories, groupthink, etc., etc. So those things are probably resolved to a psychological explanation. But what about, has done like you see like strange lights doing maybe some strange things, and there's some detection of those lights as well. So I'm not sure that these are really going to be resolved by the same methods.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, actually. I think in order to study all of these different types of reports, it requires a lot of different kinds of approaches from different fields. And absolutely, a lot of high strangeness experience, or a lot of high strangeness reports and high strangeness experiences, do have well-grounded, plausible explanations behind them in terms of, things like sleep paralysis experiences and hypnagogic. I don't think typically hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations are a little bit weaker, but I think that it's some high strangeness experiences, like seeing orbs in your bedroom, which is really commonly reported, or like shadow people near your bed or stuff like that. And memory fabrication, people can easily actually implant a memory. Elizabeth Loftus and a whole bunch of other psychological researchers have demonstrated this very well, that you can literally you don't even have to hypnotize a person. You just have to, tell them the account, say that it happened, and then, you come back 2 weeks later and they will have that memory, they will think that actually happened to them. And so, but on the other hand, though, I think that for me, I think a lot of these, I don't think that we can reduce all high strangeness experiences. I think that some of them have more meaning to them, which is not to say that they are representative of higher. I don't, I'm very skeptical of non-human intelligence. I don't really think that's something that we can demonstrate scientifically. And I'm also like spiritually agnostic. And I think that those things are, though, that's directly related, but like, because I think NHI could exist, but we can't scientifically study it, right? But
Well, let's
but
not.
well, let me finish my thought. But I think that in order to understand a lot of these really complex experiences, we cannot look at them too reductively, because they do have meaning, and they're not just byproducts, of physiological processes, like near-death experiences, post bereavement experiences, experiences associated with trauma. These are personally meaningful experiences, and I think that we can only understand them as the result of like the evolution of the human mind over a very long period of time, rather than, I think it's far less plausible that it would be accidental, that these types of experiences of otherworldly beings would be so both universal and also diverse. You know what I'm saying? That's just my opinion.
Well, this is basically how, like the psychosocial, like people kind of like try and look at this topic. Like, they argue that even, contactees, which, I don't believe for a second any of them were actually talking to like space brothers, but like that there's, you can actually study, their narratives and the context in which the stories came about and all these other aspects. And there's stuff you can learn from that. But what I was going to say is that let's also just not forget the fact that there are a lot of hoaxes when it comes to things like humanoid encounters and UFOs. Like, people may not hoax just like boring UFO sightings, but there are, as often as, some people might want to claim, but there are a ton of hoaxes when it comes to humanoids, like admitted hoaxes, like famous ones, like ones that later came out, like, yeah, it didn't actually happen. Like, so there's also a lot of that going on, like, as well. In fact, a case I'll be covering this coming week, is another Brazilian case, I think it is, that was a pretty major case covered in lots of places, and it was an outright hoax. Like, so there are quite a few hoaxes as well when it comes to this stuff. But there is, like, UFO sightings, a residual of high strangeness cases where there's really only like kind of, a variety of different options. Like either like they're lying and it's a hoax, or like they hallucinated it, or they had a real encounter. But again, there's never really enough evidence to really say one way or another. And that's always the case with these UFO sightings. Like you may not be able to explain it like completely, but you also don't have any evidence to say it is something like truly, unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Even the hoaxes are interesting because you can ask, like, why did the hoaxer choose this trope instead of that one? And that could have some social significance as well. Or it could be like unconscious reasons why they choose things, and that could be an interesting question to ask.
Well, and people always say like, it's not a hoax. Like, what motivation do they have to hoax something, right? Like, what, they don't get anything out of it. Like, it does nothing but hurt them. Like, and that's just really a simplistic like understanding of why people like commit hoaxes. Like, and sometimes there isn't really a good reason why they did it. Like a lot of times they didn't even intend to do it. Like something got out of hand and it got away from them before they could really stop it and say, wait a second, like that wasn't actually like real. Like there's been cases like that. So
yeah, that's the thing, is that people like can't like look at people in a black and white way, because like people do things for all sorts of weird reasons. Like and it's like you can't just like look at something that someone does like that, like a hoax, and just be like, oh well, they did this maliciously. Well, their intention isn't there physically in the environment. Only their, all we can see is what they did, not what they were thinking or what they were feeling. It's really interesting. And like in the trickster and the paranormal, and I think I've read about this in other sources too. Like, I think Jerome Clark talks about this as well. It's like, yeah, people they'll perpetrate hoaxes in order to try to, not to try to convince people that something is real that is not, but because they believe something is real and they want to bring public attention to it. And the only way that they know how to do that is by hoaxing, like.
Yeah, it's like when they believe in a greater truth, but they have to slip in a lie to get people to make the bridge. Oh.
Right. Yeah.
That's actually something that's brought up in, I believe it's Pierre Lagrange's article, chapter in Alien Worlds, where, like I mentioned earlier, they were talking about contactees and how there's still like information you get from studying them. And they talk about the evidence, like people like Adamski presented his photos and stuff, right? And how it can be true that the photos were fake, that they faked them to present an experience that they actually believe happened. So the photos can be a hoax, and they can still believe their story, or it could all be a hoax either way. But there's value in studying it still. So I mean, that's why I'm interested in things like UFO religions and contactees. And I didn't used to be honest. I used to be a nuts and bolts guy, like just really into like the hardcore science, and we're going to prove there are aliens or something. But like now I'm much more interested in like, reading a lot of stuff that like I didn't even bother to read like contactee stuff back in the day because I thought it was all BS. Like now it actually interests me. So like I'll read that stuff. I don't believe it, but like I read it. And I read about these various UFO religions, and I like to read about hoaxes. I think there's what we said, there's a lot we can learn about like the hoaxes. And that's why I post hoaxes too. That's why I do post in case that I know already are hoaxes that, were admitted hoaxes or whatever, because I think there's something you can learn from seeing the hoaxes that were, committed.
And why people persist in believing the hoaxes even after they've been exposed.
That's always the funny thing, like even when a guy admits he like hoaxed it, there'll still be people that'll say he was pressured into doing that. They got to him. Like it's still real. Like it's the will to believe is super strong in some people.
Yep.
Yeah. And another thing too is like that I have been thinking a lot about is when there's a lot of different topics, right, that are associated with UFOs, and I think that really the most important things are, for me anyway, and I think that they should be for other people too, are the ethical concerns, right? Like so. This is totally dovetails with Sarah Skoll's point as well, of this, like, should we really be like obsessing over these like aliens, like that are here to like communicate with us and like cater to us and like help actualize humans, both on a special level, right, but also on an individual level, right? Like, I mean, shouldn't we really be focusing more on like making sure that like all of the NHI are safe, that we can make all of the NHI as safe as we can, right? In terms of all of the animals, right? That were like people are so obsessed with these NHI that they don't know exist. We don't really, like we do so many horrible things as a species to all of the cetaceans, to all of the domestic animals. I mean, not all of them, but generally speaking, when like the way that domestic animals are treated is really fundamentally very unethical in a lot of ways. And I'm not like, that's not like I'm not judging anyone's individual actions there. I'm saying that that's like a broad systemic issue, right? But yeah, like I'm rambling.
And Brian Senthes makes these points about NHI, and
who does?
Brian Senthes, of the
he's cool.
Skunk Works
one. God,
blog. Yeah.
Skunkworks blog.
Yeah, that's why, like studying the UFO, studying the alien, like we're really just studying like ourselves, like because we're the alien, we're the other, like
Yeah, well, but
our
also
perspectives on it.
yeah, but also like like when we think about these categories of UFOs, like people tend to think of UFOs as being this other, right? But it's like, well, yeah, but like aren't they just another type of flying object, or not another type but another set of flying objects, right? It's like that's all, so there shouldn't be anything fundamentally different between UFOs and IFOs. It's just that one is more difficult to identify for whatever factors, right? Like, which could be totally arbitrary. It doesn't have to be like some sort of weird like quantum effect or something. Like it's just they're not identified, but they're flying objects, just like cicadas or birds or ball lightning, like or vortices, like that's so like I become more and more fascinated just by regular mundane flying objects every day personally, because it's like if we're able to understand those kind of phenomena, then we would have a more realistic prediction for what a UFO might actually look like. So like, like what, let's suppose that there actually was a really weird and strange and exotic flying object, that someone saw. What would that actually be like? In order to understand that, we just have to look at other natural phenomena that have those same characteristics. Sorry for being ranty. Does anyone have anything to say before I move on to the next segment?
I'll just say before everyone just calls us debunkers, like this, none of this precludes the possibility that maybe there is, some sort of alien life visiting us. Like that may also be true. But we need evidence like to support that. And you can study this topic from all these different perspectives and look at it from all these different ways without, blocking off the idea that it's even possible that aliens are visiting us. Like that could in fact still be true. In my case, I'll just want, good evidence to support that before I actually believe it. But so many people jump on this bandwagon, and you're a debunker if you even suggest studying this topic, like, psychologically or sociologically or the religious aspects. Like by doing that, you're somehow like trying to claim there's nothing to it. Like no one's experiences are real. Like none of these could possibly be ET. Like, well, that's not really what you're saying. Like that's really just not even a factor that you're taking into consideration when you're looking at this various stuff. But there's a lot to be learned by studying those things. So,
Yep.
Good call. Good call. All right, let's see how long I can just really awkwardly create dead air. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for joining us, especially for those who joined us live, but we greatly appreciate all of your support. Now, just for this first episode, I'd like to give a brief peer-reviewed statement on what this new show is all about. The purpose of this show is twofold. Our first purpose is fact-based reporting. That is, to provide a show that centers on current fact-based information surrounding the UFO topic, as well as giving an accurate context for that information, with things like further background, historical segments, commentary, and segments that look into topics a little bit more in depth. And our second purpose is community. We are trying to provide a community platform for rational discourse on the UFO subject. This includes having a live moderated show streamed before a live chatting audience. I see you there, Simon. It also includes things like promoting our friends and colleagues and their projects, and Amy.
And it will include things like having guests and even finding other participants, such as additional hosts, to add their own independent perspectives, as well as potentially other participants to help us grow this project. Each of us have our own views on the UFO topic. We each approach the topic from our own perspectives and using our own methods. And we are each in different places along our own individual paths. The UFO Detox Hour is not a one size fits all show, that only approaches UFOs from a very particular stance and using very particular ways of thinking. Well, I mean, that's not exactly accurate, but you get the idea. Instead, we will be using the independent approaches of multiple participants. Independent approaches of multiple participants. These include critiquing popular UFO narratives by examining the behavior of those making dubious claims, and looking at UFO history and the background of particular stories in the news. And we'll be looking at the sciences to report as accurately as we can the current knowledge on all topics pertaining to UFOs. This includes not only things like astrophysics, biology, and earth sciences, it also includes various approaches, in the human sciences. Fields like medicine, psychology, consciousness studies, sociology, cultural anthropology, folkloristics, forensic investigation, and comparative religion studies. We will even look at philosophy and critical theory as it pertains to the topic, as well as perspectives from any other field, from aesthetics to spirituality. We are not here to just act like fools live on YouTube. We are also here to help empower the community of those out there who are like us. So the best way that you can support us is by participating and acting like a fool yourself. That was totally improvised, by the way. Both of those acting the fool lines. Please participate in the live chat and follow us on YouTube and on Twitter. But above all, please visit other creators in our community and support their content. At the UFO Detox Hour, we will strive to create a space where people can feel free to share their unique perspectives without fear of harassment. We will not tolerate fascism, racism, or intolerance based on gender, sex, sexual identity, ethnicity, ability, or religion. Our hope is to show people that not only can one think about UFOs in a rational way, but there is an endless amount one can learn by doing so, and that there is a whole wonderful community of people out there, all doing that in a whole variety of different ways. And I'm going to skip that line. All right. Okay. So, yeah. And with that, we have reached the shout out section of the show. So this is where we, give acknowledgments and, praise for the people who have helped us and supported us and acted as role models and have, provided valuable, research and all of that good stuff, So I'm going to let Luis go first because I'm just going to do that.
I was going to shout out to Jeff for helping me follow some things up, but he's right here. But
other people.
Vicente Juan Ballester Olmos. I'd like to shout out to him. People should check out his research as well, including his. He's actually got a couple of books out more recently. I think that's about it. Sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, that's a good shout out. Yes, Ballester Olmos is really good. We were also talking about eventually doing a book club where we discuss each chapter of his book, The Reliability of UFO Eyewitness Testimony, the book that he edited and contributed to. That guy is he's a
Spanish
giant upon whose shoulders like many people stand, and Yeah, I would like to give a shout out to everyone at the Invisible Night School, except for Luis. I'm excluding Luis from. No, I'm just kidding. Shout out to Luis. Let him know that I shouted him out, Luis. I'm talking about future Luis, but I'm addressing shared present Luis. Shout out to future Luis, but also shout out to present Luis as well. Have future Luis tell him to shout out. Yeah, you get the idea. Anyways, shout out to Jeff from Strange Recon, Jeff Whiteberry. I'm sorry, Jeff Whitebear Kingsbury. Excuse me. Very wonderful guy. Very he's just a really nice guy and also very funny. We would love to have you on the show. Shout out to Spooky. Shout out to Leah. Shout out to Nick Coffin Collis and Campbell Morera. I'm going to just do that individually. Also, shout out to Expanding Frontiers Research, Jack Brewer, Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes has been incredibly nice to me, and she is just such a sweetheart. She's a really wonderful person and a huge inspiration to me because, you know, what I am doing is largely just, you know, trying to, you know, extend that kind of, you know, community building and fact-based reporting that Erica is always already striving to do. Shout out to Mick West for using, you know, rigorous and scientific methodologies for understanding the UFO topic. You know, I think he's a hero. You know, I don't agree with everything he says, but I definitely agree with, you know, what he does, the work he does on Metabunk, and he does wonderful educational videos. Yeah, I could just go on and on. Is there someone I should be shouting out? Someone throw out names in the chat of people you want shouted out. Also, shout out to Simon Fly and Amy Collins for joining us.
And Amy Collins, yes.
Uh, oh shoot. Shout out to Jay Shank for being hilarious on Twitter. Shout out to AP Strange and Liminal Earth. These people, you know, have had a huge impact on me over the last year. You know, I'm a big weirdo, and I love the weirdness, and I just love all of it. It's all plasma to me. So not literally. This is I'm talking about the metaphysical plasma. There are states of metaphysical matter, and this is the fourth metaphysical phase of metaphysical matter. It just means super cool. Shout out to the flies in my apartment. And go ahead, Jeff. Did you already give your shout outs? No, I don't think you did. Go
ahead. Shout out to no one because nobody helps me. I'm a lone wolf. No, I'm just kidding. Mostly just like historical people, you know, like I couldn't do the work I do without like the people that came before me, the Barry Greenwoods, Jan Aldrichs, you know, the work of Isaac Coig and so much stuff digitized and archived on the AFU file server.
Fred Anderson, awesome guy, very friendly, very nice.
Yep, definitely. You know, and just the Swords History Group people, you know, you know, you got like Tom Tullian, Robert Powell, Michael Swords, Eddie Ballard, Thomas Ballard, you know, Mark Rodiger, all these guys that kind of came before me and whose work I use in all my posts. But specifically this week, shout out would be to like Jenny Zeldman for her work on the coin helicopter case. She published a big QFOS book on it, and that's
David Clark.
Yeah,
David Clark. He shared an old article he did on luminous owls with me, which is very nice. But yeah, I'm shout out to him as well. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Jeff.
And just a lot of the original research on the Via Boas case, you know, came from, you know, Dr. Olivo Fontes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Who was APRA's consultant at the time. Like I said, the original testimonies that I read that he had given, were in an interview with him. And he was a pretty major Brazilian, ufologist.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just, I couldn't do the work I do without all the great researchers before me and all the material that's been published. And yes, we can't forget
Star and the 115 crew.
La Bizarre. He's a lobster. And I'm going to eat it for dinner. And I'm going to use seasoning 115 on it. So.
Yeah, shout out to Lou Elizondo.
Who's Lou?
I just ironically ironic that now it's time for ironic shout outs. Shout out to Jose Chung. Shout out to Agents Mulder and Scully. Huge part of my life. Okay. And for a story to close out on tonight, let's see. Why won't it show the slide? Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. A free art exhibit called "Sightings" is on display at the Sun Valley Museum of Art in Ketchum, Idaho. Let me reread that all for you so that you can actually understand what I just said. And for a story to close out on tonight, a free art exhibit called Sightings is on display at the Sun Valley Museum of Art in Ketchum, Idaho. The free exhibit features 20 works from different artists and will run through December 2nd. Before we go, we would like you to please consider subscribing to our brand new channel, the UFO Detox Hour. Please also hit the like button and hit the notification bell if you'd like to get notified about upcoming videos. We would love to see your very tiny faces and other profile icons in the live chat. Please be sure to consider checking out our respective content too. I'm sorry, I'm very exhausted. I can be found at the Earth YouTube channel. Please visit Luis Cayetano's website, ufologyiscorrupt.com. A never truer statement has been said. If you just think about it for a bit, it works. And you can find Jeff Knox's daily posts on history and the science of UFOs on Twitter or Facebook. We are very grateful for both of their participations. And all right, so now it is time to say farewell. It is time to say goodbye.
Catch you guys later.
Yep.
Oh, wait a minute. We forgot about Dorothy.
She's doing her own thing right now. Mostly sleeping.
Sleeping. 80% sleeping, 20% other things.
Pretty much, which I guess is better than barking in the middle of talking. So, next time. Leave the suspense. So
next time on the UFO Detox Hour, Dorothy tries to lick her ear.
I'll just have her do my whole presentation. And barks. They said the Diaboas aliens were growling like dogs. That's how they talked. So that could have just been background, for the storytelling. But,
yeah. Okay.
All right.
Farewell, Luis. Farewell, Simon and Amy and our secret friend. Or I don't know what that 3 means. That is 3 watching, right? But obviously, I don't mean us 3. So,
yeah.
Good night, Simon. Good night, Amy. Good night, Jeff. Good night, picture on the wall. Good night, the thing that says the watch count. Good night, UFOs.
Bye.
So long. Farewell.